Hi, my name is Scott Lormer. This is my final presentation for Introduction to Buddhism. My topic of choice today was Introduction to the 12 Nidanas, also known as the 12 links of dependent origination. Um, let's see if this works. All right. Okay. So, before I dig into the details, I think the history of the 12 Nidanas is worth exploring because it's a bit of a derived belief system. It didn't directly come from the Buddha, but rather it is something that Buddhist scholars after the Buddha and early Buddhist texts developed. So, as I mentioned, it's also known as the 12 links of dependent origination. And this kind of alludes to the structure of them, namely that there are 12 links that rely on each other in order to occur and create a bit of a chain. Um, there are two primary interpretations of the 12 links. We have something called, or what I like to call the psychological model, which is a view that the 12 links are, you could say, a system to describe how mental phenomena occur, um, their origin in karma, and their future karmic effects. Uh, as a result, the psychological model explores a phenomena that happens in the mind many times over a lifetime, minute to minute, even second to second. The second model, which is, while doing my research, I noticed a lot more popular with uh, Tibetan Buddhism and more Mahayana schools of Buddhism, is the lifetime model, is what I would call that. And the lifetime model is essentially this a view that the 12 links describe the progression of a individual in samsara from conception to birth, through existence, and then eventually to death. There's actually a surprising degree of overlap despite the difference in time frame between the two models. In this, I'm going to explore the psychological model more, or the psychological interpretation, if you will, of the 12 Nidanas. But it should be said that the 12 Nidanas are still, or the 12 links are still a active area of research. A lot of ink has been spilled regarding the interpretation between the Nidanas and the relationship they have to each other. Before I proceed, I wanted to point something out. I'm not sure if my mouse is visible, but what you see here is this wheel with Mara on top, or the god of death, or is it Maya? It's called a Bhava Chakra. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, and it actually shows a lot of embedded systems within Buddhism. The two I want to explore the most here are the rim, and the rim is actually the 12 links. So different temples have different bhava chakras, and they choose different pictures, but there are some recurring themes. So the first one, and we'll see this later, tends to be a blind old person, which symbolizes ignorance. And again, I'll get into that later. Death is also one of the 12 links, and that tends to be symbolized with dead bodies. Um, there's birth, often symbolized by a woman giving birth. So there's recurring themes there. For my presentation, I'm going to focus on the psychological model, but I'm also going to take a particular Bhava Chakra and explore each individual image. I found these images from a particular page through Carthage University. A professor took the liberty of interpreting each of them. So I'm going to go through each of them, explain them, but also sort of show the symbolism between the concepts in the psychological model and the concepts as you might view them in the lifetime model. So again, before I proceed, a couple of things to understand about the bhava chakras is uh, the number and the nature of the links are somewhat controversial. The Buddha never explicitly laid down the system of the 12 Nidanas. Um, a couple of the lectures I listened to implied that there are suttas that are part of the Pali Canon, which is the um, recorded, well, not recorded, but the written down speeches or lectures of the Buddha that imply two or three links or a link here, a link there, but they don't put them together. And I'm actually going to later in this presentation explore a sutta that was said by the Buddha that does imply some of the relationships in the 12 Nidanas. But for the most part, the 12 Nidanas is a system that came after the Buddha's death as part of the early Buddhist texts as Buddhism was growing as a religion. So there are many prominent Buddhist philosophers as Buddhism began to grow. One that people that are familiar with Buddhist history might be familiar with is Nagarjuna, who is often said to be the father of Mahayana Buddhism. This was before Nagarjuna, after Buddha. This was as Buddhism was becoming more systemized, and as people were, or as monks were uh, developing a system of explanation for psychological phenomena or for the passing karma from a lifetime to a lifetime, we ended up with something like the 12 Nidanas. Again, some people think there's less of them. Some of these phenomena I'm going to describe are very similar. It can be argued to be the same concept. It's still controversial. It's a matter of, as I say here, a matter of discussion. Um, so uh, that's why this is an introduction to the 12 Nidanas rather than a comprehensive discussion. You could probably spend several days going over the 12 Nidanas if you really wanted to go into detail. Um, these processes are intrinsically intertwined and require the previous Nidanas to occur. So the 12 Nidanas can be thought of as a chain where if you break any of the particular pieces of the chain, the whole chain falls apart. So they're kind of causal in a way. So A causes B, causes C, causes D, or I shouldn't say causes. A is dependent on B, which is dependent on C, which is dependent on E. Um, so as you'll see down here, we have um, ignorance, compounding factors, consciousness. So the way to understand this would be that compounding factors are a result of ignorance. Consciousness is a result of compounding factors, and so on and so on. Um, this should be understood as happening without a self. So, a pretty central belief in Buddhism is the concept of not self, which is admittedly a bit of a complex concept. They're not arguing that individuals don't exist, but they are arguing that there isn't a sort of consistent core in individuals, a consistent core that's unchanging, like a soul. Um, so this should be understood to be happening um, without a self, but is actually possibly reinforcing the concept of self, which in Buddhism is considered a delusion, is incorrect. So as we get on later, there'll be some links that imply self, and it should be understood that this is happening um, to an individual, but not implying the existence of a consistent self. Um, as I mentioned earlier, the ordering of the Nidanas is somewhat controversial. I read a couple pages that view them as happening in a what I consider to be a somewhat a typical order, but I'm no expert. This picture below was from one of my main references. They view the Nidanas as being split into what they call impelling causes. Impelling causes being things that uh, allow stage two or actualizing causes to happen. So they are the sort of karmic backbone. If you did something that has karmic consequences, the impelling causes are what lead to the eventual actualizing causes. So the actualizing causes are the things happening, and then the results are the results of the actualizing causes. So this is, say, if you give into craving, there's consequences, and the consequences are the results, or the stage three. Um, uh, Let me go back one more time to point something out. Again, with the bhava chakra, is you see this as a circle, and that's important because the links lead to each other happening, but um, the links reinforce continued cycles of the 12 nidanas. So you don't go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then stop at 12, and then you never have to experience the 12 nidanas again, at least under the psychological model. Rather, the nidanas have consequences that lead to future um, turns of the wheel, if you will, future continuation along the 12 nidanas. So something kind of clever here is the reason it's a circle is because it's a loop. Um, and yes, so that's something to understand as I go through all 12 of them. So the 12 nidanas are in order, again, somewhat controversial, but in the order that I found for the most part, for most resources, was ignorance leads to preliminary factors, leads to consciousness, leads to name and form, or what I dub distinction, which leads to sense, contact, feeling or sensation, thirst, um, clinging or grasping, reinforcement, birth, and then death or secession. And I'm going to go ahead and explore each of the 12 of these and try to explain in some detail what they mean and how they relate to each other. So the first, and what I would argue the most important link, is the first one, or ignorance. Ignorance is an incorrect perspective that leads to continued mental formations that keep somebody in samsara, which is the cycle of suffering, or the cycle of continued existence. Um, Ignorance is pretty broad sweeping. It doesn't mean ignorance of A or ignorance of B. It can mean ignorance of how the world works, of the consequences of specific actions. And by that, I mean, if I get this thing I want, I'll be happy, rather than, I'll want something else. Um, as our ignorance of the four noble truths, or three marks of existence, what comes to mind for me there is impermanence is a big one. People tend to latch on to things that they um, want to continue forever, whether it's relationships, your health, um, your career. Humans oftentimes suffer because they don't understand, as one of the three marks of existence, that impermanence is a consistent part of our world, and that sort of nothing lasts forever. And that way, ignorance sort of impels the continuation of the cycle. Um, but in general, an ignorance of a correct view, an ignorance of how the world works, and an ignorance of how specific patterns of behavior can lead to continued samsara, or continued dukkha, which is can be thought of as like lack of satisfaction or suffering in life, is the sort of root of everything else that happens in the 12 links. It's so important, in fact, that it's part of another teaching that I'll touch on later, called the three poisons, or the three root kleshas, which are three pivotal concepts that are the, I guess you could say, root of continued samsara and continued dukkha. And ignorance is one of the, and some argue the most important of the three root kleshas. So there is a subtle distinction to be made about ignorance, and this is I guess, a topic of debate. Ignorance can mean two different things, and possibly both, depending on your understanding of Buddhism. Ignorance can either be what's a lack of correct perception or an incorrect perception, and those sound the same initially. So I want to sort of explore the differences. So if I were to think that something were the case and it were not the case, if I were to stand in a field and see a little black ball of fur and think that's a dog, but it's actually a bear, I would have a incorrect perception. My perception of the object across the field is not correct. The correct answer is that it's a bear, and my incorrect perception is that it's a dog. So I would be ignorant of um, what I'm looking at. That assumes that I have a positive perception or an actual perception, and that the actual perception is wrong. The other form of ignorance is not being able to access something that is true. So, if I say don't understand politics, I may be ignorant of the way that the government works. I don't have an incorrect perception. I don't have a perception at all because I don't have any of the required prerequisite knowledge in order to understand how a government system works. It was on some of my resources, it was described as having like a black veil or a fog over your perception. Um, and the second one implies that one needs to practice in order to be able to access certain forms of knowledge, and that ignorance can be pushed away in that way. And the other one implies that you can correct your beliefs in order to have a more correct belief that can lead you out of ignorance. Um, it's important because as ignorance is one of the most important links to the chain, knowing how to not no longer be ignorant is a large part of leaving samsara. Um, so I've read. um, Ignorance also includes attachment to the self, or a lack of belief in not self, or anatta, I believe is how it's pronounced. Um, which again, the Buddha himself discusses often as being fairly important, as is realizing not self. Um, so this picture right here is of a blind old man, or actually I think it was a blind old woman rather, um, which is supposed to imply ignorance. I think it's very clear. As a person cannot see, they can't see what the truth is. Um, so let's go to the next one. The second one is preliminary factors. Preliminary factors can be thought of as your sort of karmic seeds coming to fruit, or as the karmic seeds coming to fruit in the future. And by that I mean, if you did something in the past that has karmic consequences now, those seeds or those or that bad karma, if you will, or karma that you built up before is actualizing itself now. So that's what the second link or the preliminary formations are. Um, it's it's a bit abstract and a bit unclear to me, but if it's a process or a distinct entity, if preliminary factors are a thing, or if it's a process, but you can think of them as sort of primitive impulses, volitional elements, sort of background unconscious processes that start working that will result in you acting one way or another. Um, Now, we'll see later that action doesn't come, or action or thought doesn't come until later in the 12 links of interdependent origination. So these preliminary factors are pre-thought. The person is, as far as I know, not aware that these processes that they've built up through their karma are about to occur. I think the best way to think about this is if, say, you are a cigarette smoker and you tend to feel strong urges to smoke, um, and you smoke, what happens is by smoking, you reinforce the habit, and these preliminary factors begin to start working right before you begin to feel your urge to smoke again. So this is before you're aware, but after the last action that led to them um, being reinforced. The name in Pali for preliminary factors is kama something, So there is a strong relationship to kama being karma. There's a strong relationship to one's karma when considering preliminary factors. So preliminary factors, again, can be thought of as the karmic consequences of past actions coming to fruit in the present. The picture here is a potter. This one I've read is pretty common for the second link. Pots are, I guess, often used in ancient India to symbolize something that is being molded, something that changes over time, because pots have uses, they break, they're remade, et cetera, et cetera. So they're very versatile, and in that way, they symbolize one molding their self via their karma or their these preliminary factors. Um, Third link is consciousness. This isn't consciousness how we typically use it in the West. So it's not awareness as you would think of it. Rather, consciousness can be thought of as the storehouse or the container that the next few nidanas are held in. Consciousness is sort of the stage that these mental phenomena occur in. Um, in a lot of ways, it can be interpreted a lot like mind. Yeah, the mind. It acts as the soil that the karmic seeds will be growing from. It's different than thought. So consciousness is not the same as awareness. And I'm not an experienced meditator, but my understanding is that this form of consciousness is probably difficult to access in your day-to-day life, but it acts as the sort of background that everything happens under. Um, yeah, it does not contain perceptions of self that potentially occur later on. And by that, I mean, it's maybe closer to the state where pure awareness occurs. So if we think of the thoughts of, say, an animal or of a child has awareness and they have consciousness, but they don't have a sense of self. Well, some animals and young children. So children don't know they're children. As they get older, they begin to understand who they are and what they are. And many animals don't understand what they are. They have awareness and they have instinct, and um, we would still consider them to have consciousness, um, devoid of a concept of self. So consciousness, again, is this sort of background storehouse where one's thoughts and feelings and impulses occur. Uh, let me explain the picture. So the monkey is um, a common uh, symbol of consciousness. Uh, the monkey, because it jumps around and because it's very active and it's sort of hard to control, and there's a lot of allusions to Buddhism of things like monkey mind, or this idea that the mind is something that is hard to lasso or to control. And in that way, consciousness, being the symbol of the sort of mind itself, is well symbolized by a monkey. So, all right, fourth one, name and form. Um, so, name and form and consciousness can be thought of as occurring together. Consciousness is a prerequisite, as I explained, for all the chains for name and form, but consciousness does not lead to name and form. Okay, so what is name and form? It can be thought of as discrimination of a formation. So what does that mean? Let's see, what do I have on my desk? So um, this water bottle, for example, is a collection of, you could say, mental stimuli, right? But me naming it a water bottle and attaching concept to it and attaching a barrier to it, me sort of differentiating it out of the background, that is the process of name and form. With one's thoughts, you can think, I am thinking a thought right now. This thing that I'm thinking is a thought. Um, Seems kind of obvious, but the truth is that um, that is a process that one actively participates in, sort of labeling concepts and labeling ideas and um, building nets of association with those ideas is a result of this process of discrimination or discriminating things in your environment. Um, it is tied to a later um, concept of birth, which is, I believe, the 11th Nidana, or arising mental phenomena by giving a form of permanent identity. So, name and form is also where self occurs, or self reinforcement, which the Buddha said was a form of delusion. So, one thinks there are thoughts, I'm having these thoughts are mine. I have a lot of thoughts that are like this instead of like this. I like these things and don't like these things. I am this kind of person. I'm not this kind of person. That entire process of name of self identity starts with discriminating that sort of difference. You know, I like this thing. I don't like this thing. This is a good feeling. This is a bad feeling. I tend to do this. I don't tend to do that. Um, I, Scott, I'm this type of person. That is starts with me labeling myself and making myself out to be a self or different than my environment. Um, so, in some ways, an understanding of name and form can help a bit with that concept of understanding not self or nada, which is one of the three marks of existence in Buddhism. So for this picture, it's two men in a boat. One of them is name, one of them is form. And it just shows that name and form are in the same boat, so to speak, or the same phenomena or the same concept. All right, so number 5 is the six senses. Now this one is a bit of an abstract one. So the six senses, or the five senses that we learn about in the West, which is taste, smell, touch, hearing, and wow, I can't remember the last sense. And in the fifth one, whatever that one was, plus awareness. So awareness is different, as I explained, than consciousness, and awareness is different than naming things. So name and form, or having an idea of what's your discriminating environment, is not the same as sort of an awareness of what that thing is, or differentiating a self is not the same as self-awareness. I know that's kind of it seems like a small difference, but it's taken to be a entirely different um, Nidana in Buddhism. So the sixth sense has a pure sensation without assignment to an object, and we'll see later that assignment occurs. But the six senses are, or the five senses are your qualia, or your pure sensation, or your sense data. So, um, I can feel something, but I don't have to say what that thing is yet. And that's what's occurring here, is it's sensation without uh, assignment. It's really kind of the only way for me to say that. So if I go back, 3, 4, and 5 here all combined together for 6. So the best way to understand consciousness, name and form, and the six senses is they're all part of properties of experience that are distinct, or viewed as distinct in Buddhism. Later on, they culminate into a object of sensation, something that we attach as being an object. But for now, uh, 3 and 4 and 5 can be thought of as occurring at the same time. So with the water bottle, I am looking at it. It has certain color. The color feels a specific way, it feels a specific way to see red, which you see here, and white, and clear. For name and form, I'm naming in a water bottle. I'm discriminating its borders and space. And then for consciousness, all of this occurs in the background of my mind, or in the setting of consciousness. So So 6 is where all of these elements synthesize together into what's called contact. So contact um, is we are in contact with a unified object or thing. It becomes a thing now, or an idea. So this water bottle is now a water bottle with all of its properties, with its color, with the sensations that come with the water bottle, with all the associations in the past. And this whole process starts with contact with the object. Oh, before I move on, um, the picture, right? The picture here is of a house with 6 windows. Um, this is essentially just the 6 sense gates, what they call sense gates in Buddhism, which are 6 passages for stimuli to come into the body. Without your senses, you can't perceive anything. I mean, consciousness still occurs, and you can still assign name and form to ideas and to thoughts, but there's no content to those thoughts without the senses, without some sort of a medium to experience. So in this picture, the doors are shut, but essentially, when one opens the sense gates or allows things to come in and to be experienced, you are, building one part of an object. So these are 6 closed doors to symbolize the 6 senses. All right, so back to number 6. So 6 is the synthesis of the last 3 of name and form, 6 senses and consciousness into an object. At this form, we have at this point we have something unified. This object contains properties. It contains aspects. Um, Now that we're in contact with it, we can interact with it and develop preference, which comes later. And yeah, so contact can vaguely be thought of as just the point where an object of the mind becomes an object at all. Uh, so this picture, which on every site I looked at was the same, is 2 lovers having sex, and that makes sense. It's contact, so it's contact with an object of desire. In which case, it's 2 people having sex. So um, number 7, feeling or sensation. Okay, so um, in the last Nidana, we have a unified object of perception. We have something, a thing, but I haven't judged whether or not I like this thing or I don't like this thing, or I have no feelings about this thing. Um, right, but on 7, feelings or sensation, this is the point where we have an inclination towards an object. And I'm actually going to start with the photo because the photo is a very, I would consider to be a very strong example of what they mean by inclination. So this photo is of a person with, let's see if you can see my mouse, an arrow in their eye. Uh, so as you can imagine, having an arrow shot into your eye would be, if you're still alive to feel it, incredibly painful. Um, and this is the point where um, most people would say, oh my God, this is the worst experience ever. This is terrible. I hate this. I'm going to die. This is bad, 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 bad. What you're doing there is you are beginning the process of the 7th Nidana, which is feeling or sensation. Um, so after we made contact with an object, an inclination towards the object is created. We determine that it's a positive object, that it's a negative object, that it is a neutral object. Uh, Although the example is kind of harsh, this isn't the point yet where one has a strong reaction. This is simply the point where one has a sort of subtle tag of this is positive, this is negative, this is neutral. Um, this concept oftentimes is mixed with the concept of self. So if I feel that I am the type of person that shouldn't like this or that should like this, then I may judge a feeling or sensation based off of self image. Um, so feeling or sensation or inclination is another way of putting it, is strongly tied to one's associations, things that have happened in your past, views of yourself, and then automatic reactions as well. So food preferences for the most part don't have a aspect of um, food preferences don't have an aspect of self identity. You just taste it, it makes you feel bad, it tastes bad, and then you have a negative inclination towards that food. Um, Aversion and attachment require that sort of tagging of something as being negative or positive. And aversion and attachment are the two other of the three poisons. So, um, if you remember from earlier, I said that ignorance was one of the three poisons and arguably the most important one. The other two are aversion, which is not wanting to be near something, wanting to push something away. This often shows up as anger or hatred. I hate this thing. I don't want to be near it. I want nothing to do with it. And then there's attachment, which is I need this thing. I want this thing. I have to have this thing. Where the most extreme version of that would maybe be obsession, or yeah, I would say obsession. Obsession probably be, or greed. Really needing something. Well, none of that starts without one tagging stimuli as being necessarily negative or necessarily positive. And this process of feeling of sensation is one of the three processes that are very important for leading to future karma and future suffering. So when one feels something and determines that they are experiencing something bad, they are engaging in feeling or sensation. I wanted to, before I move on to the next slide, I wanted to tell in probably somewhat of a butchered fashion. I want to talk about a Zen story that I've read a couple times that talks about feeling or sensation a bit. So the story starts that there is a general who goes through a village and he raises the village and he kills a bunch of people, and the army defending the village is scattered and run away. A bunch of people are running with the army. They're trying to get out of town, and people are going door to door and they say, "You need to get out of here. This is really bad. This general is coming into town. He's killing everybody. He's taking whatever he wants. He's razing and pillaging the place." And a young monk goes into a temple and asks the sort of master of that temple to leave. Uh, he doesn't respond. He says, "We need to go. We need to go. We need to go." He says, "I'm not going to leave." And he says, "Fine, I'm going to get out of here." So um, several minutes later, the general kicks down the door. He comes into the building and he says, "Monk, I need you to bow to me. I need you to, show deference, if you will." He doesn't say show deference, but that's sort of the implication. So the monk says nothing. He says, "Monk, I need you to bow to me. You need to bow to me to show deference. Do you know who I am?" The monk says nothing. He says, "Monk, do you know who I am? I am a man who can plunge a sword through you." And the monk looks at him and says, "Do you know who I am? I'm a man who could have a sword plunged through me." And that's the whole story. The point of that story is sort of well encapsulated by the seventh Nidana, which is feeling or sensation. I think most of us would consider the experience of having a sword put through our stomach to be incredibly bad, incredibly painful, something that we want to avoid. Um, Rightfully so. Um, One aspect of Buddhist training is this disassociation from um, labeling stimuli as purely negative or purely positive. And this concept makes itself sort of known during mindfulness. So a lot of mindfulness they teach people in the West comes out of this belief that tagging things as intrinsically positive or intrinsically negative leads to specific negative mental formations. It leads to judgments that lead to avoidance and attachment for things. If I feel that I need to be this kind of person, I am going to do everything I can to be this kind of person. And if I don't get it, it's going to lead me to suffering. If I feel that I'm not to be this kind of person and I end up becoming this kind of person, I may feel shame and suffering out of my failure to meet an expectation. Um, so the seventh stage or seventh nidana, feeling or sensation, is strongly tied to tagging an idea a specific way. So beating a dead horse here. So let's move on to number 8. Okay, so 8 is thirst. Thirst. Um, Thirst is also known as tana. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, or craving. Um, the picture is of a. Oh, did I say the last picture? Oh yeah, the man with the arrow. The picture of for thirst is a man having a picnic, drinking and eating. Uh, he is indulging his cravings, so or his thirst. Um, Tana is very, 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 very important for breaking the chain. So Tana or craving is something that one doesn't control per se. Tana or craving come out of one's karma. So if you back to being a smoker, if you are a smoker and you smoke a lot, and you reinforce that habit of smoking by giving in, you're likely to have what they call cravings in the future, cravings to smoke. Um, it's that sort of uncomfortable feeling, maybe in your chest, that restlessness that you feel when you don't have the thing that you want. That's tana or thirst. The Buddha actually identifies it as the greatest fetter that leads to rebirth. He explains that those who experience tana and give in to tana are like wanderers who wander from um, reincarnation to reincarnation, never finding peace. Um, there's a lot of similarities to the story of the hungry ghost, which is this thing that just seeks to consume and consume and consume and consume and consume and is never satisfied. Um, Ignorance is a large part of what leads thirst to becoming a fetter, because one does not understand that meeting a desire, meeting an impulse does not mean that the impulse will go away. It means it will come back stronger later in the future. Um, as such, it's the engine of attachment or avoidance, which are the two remaining poisons. So it's the sort of thing that compels somebody to give into an urge. And again, the chain can be broken at Tana. If one experiences discomfort and wants to give in and they don't give in, then you can break the chain or the remaining 9, 10, 11, or 12 and stop them from occurring at this phase. Um, from my personal experience, I know from meditating, I get a sort of discomfort or restlessness, a desire for additional stimuli, a desire to do something else, desire to stop. Um, I believe that's somewhat synonymous with Tana, or this um, way that your brain motivates you to act in a way that it wants you to act. So, all right. Number 9 is, oh, sorry, 1 second. Yeah. Number 9 is clinging or grasping, also known as, um, what was it? Um, okay, well, clinging or grasping, clinging or grasping. Um, so clinging or grasping is what happens if you give in to Tana or you give in to thirst. If you're thirsty and you drink, symbolically, if you're thirsty and you drink, then you are giving into a craving. Um, it's different than actually. So there's a subtlety here. It's different than acting on an urge. So action comes later. Clinging or grasping is a sort of shift that occurs in a person psychologically. So one may experience a craving and a desire for something, tana, and then they may switch to obsessing about the thing. So back to the smoker. I really want to smoke, and then I start thinking about smoking. And I look, you know, think about all these things that trigger my desire to smoke. Think about, times where I smoked that I really enjoyed it. Think about how bad I feel and how I don't want to feel that way anymore. And I change my inclination or my, you know, I guess volitional state to feeling discomfort, uncomfortable to trying to get the thing that I want. So this is a shift into um, obsession or into planning that will lead me to acting in a specific way. Um, Again, if we use meditation as an example, um, one may sit, feel uncomfortable and restless as they're meditating. And then once you start thinking, oh man, I really want to stop meditating. What am I doing here? Am I doing this right? These sort of thoughts, or what's called prapancha, proliferation of thoughts that occurs as one is sitting and meditating. um, Once you engage in that, you are clinging or grasping. Um, so this difference between tana or thirst and clinging or grasping is important because tana doesn't have karmic consequences, but clinging or grasping does. If you give in to craving, there are consequences that will lead to um, future turns of the 12 links of interdependent origination. So if you go from chain 8 to 9, you're going to complete the chain. It is at that point, you can't stop the remaining three consequences from occurring. So between 8 and 9, it's very, very important to, if you're sort of dedicated to that Buddhist cause of escaping suffering, the connection between Tana and I think it was Upadana, I don't recall, but grasping is really important. It's really important to sort of uh, break that relationship. So, as I pointed out earlier, the Buddha explained that giving into craving, going from chain 8 or link 8 to link 9, leads to um, this sort of wandering through life, trying to find satisfaction where it doesn't exist, continually giving into craving, giving your craving what it wants, and continuing to suffer. He explained that the cure is appropriate attention and paying attention to skillful questions. So, um, a large part of why this is important is because it allows one to dispel ignorance, to understand that giving into craving does not lead to satisfaction in an ultimate sense. It doesn't lead to peace. It simply leads to um, future dissatisfaction. Um, there's actually a form of meditation, I believe, used in Zen Buddhism. I'm sure there's other schools of Buddhism that use it, called death meditation, where they have monks meditate on the fact that they will ultimately die. Sometimes they bring monks to morgues to look at bodies. And the point of that is to understand the sort of futility of constantly giving into desires. Um, in many ways, it's the point of it is to break the relationship between the eighth and the ninth link, so that one does not give into desire constantly and um, create more negative karma that will lead to future tana or future thirst. Before all of this, and again, I said it's the most important chain, ignorance has to be broken. If you don't know there's a problem, then you're not going to fix the problem. If you don't know that giving into these inclinations and giving into these urges leads to the urges coming back, if you don't think that giving into these urges will ultimately make you unhappy, even if it makes you feel okay in the present, then you are, well, you're ignorant per the Buddhists. You're giving into, or you're keeping the chain going. You're keeping yourself in a samsara, or the cycle of suffering, or cycle of rebirth. Um, Craving and grasping are uncomfortable. Um, that's why they're so good at motivating people to continue engaging in them. But cessation of suffering requires overcoming these. Um, Craving and grasping themselves can be seen as forms of suffering. I think we all know what it's like to be hungry, really thirsty, really restless, wanting something or wanting to be away from something, avoidance, be away from something, or wanting something, attachment. And yep, um, craving and grasping only occur because of previous reinforcement and previous giving into desire. So Regarding reinforcement, we have chain number 10, reinforce or link number 10. Reinforcement is also called becoming. Um, from the resources I used, I felt reinforcement was the most appropriate to, I guess, sort of a Western understanding of the 10th link. It's one of the three consequences of the first of the series of 789 of the Tana um, and giving into essentially giving into craving. Um, and this is sort of the sowing of future karmic seeds. So smoking is a really good example here too. If you smoke and you try to quit and you get really uncomfortable, really irritable, you have that sort of tana, that thirst for cigarettes, and then you give in and you smoke, you will continue wanting to smoke in the future. You make the feeling go away now, but the feeling will come back in the future. And the real reason the feeling comes back at all is because the experience is reinforced. When one smokes, one reinforces future desire to smoke. So by giving into a craving, you ensure that the craving will come back again in the future. Uh, I think what's important to understand too is Buddhism isn't super black and white about this. Um, a story the Buddha often told is that he tried to starve himself and he almost died. And then a nun offered him food, and he began to understand that he was taking too extreme of a perspective um, on self denial. Um, there are urges that you can reinforce that you need to reinforce. If you're very hungry, you should eat. If you are very tired, you should sleep. Um, you're you're not really reinforcing these. The problem happens when you overeat, um, when you sleep over doing anything else, when you, well, I guess when you smoke, when you drink. These sorts of issues are reinforced by the behavior. So engaging the behavior leads to the behavior or urges for the behavior coming back. So as a result, reinforcement and thirst can be thought of as being very intimately tied together. Reinforcement leads to more thirst, which leads to more reinforcement, which leads to more thirst, and that has a sort of a looping effect. Again, if you give in to thirst and you begin clinging, then you are guaranteed 10, 11, and 12 of the links, and you will, as a result, reinforce the feeling. Okay, so 11 is, by the way, the picture is of a pregnant woman. And that makes sense because they're karmic seeds. So you are, much like a pregnant woman holds a potentiality for a human in her stomach, um, you're holding the potentiality for future rebirths of experience by reinforcing a behavior. So, and the commenter pointed out that she doesn't look very pregnant, and I agree. And weirdly enough, all of the bhava chakras that include a pregnant woman have a woman that doesn't look pregnant. So it's possible that the information I got about this is incorrect, but from what I've heard, this is supposed to be a pregnant woman. So 11th is birth, and it looks to be the same woman. Birth is where you actually act on craving and tana. So this is the part um, where you smoke, where you actually take the cigarette, put it up to your mouth, and you engage in the action. When you have planned, you've obsessed about it, and you finally do it. So this is birth. As I explained, and as I explained, engaging in clinging will result in birth. That's kind of confusing because somebody obsessing about cigarettes isn't necessarily going to smoke. So the question is, well, is there really a relationship between obsessing and between action? And the answer to that is no. And from here, I believe what happens is that um, The obsession itself can also be thought of as birth. So these negative affective states that you feel when you can't smoke, and you begin obsessing, and you begin uh, feeling uncomfortable because you can't fulfill an urge, that is also under the umbrella of birth. Um, as I wrote here, it's a rising action, but it's also the rising of thought patterns and feelings that are tied to the consequences of earlier actions. Um, and I'll admit the relationship between uh, clinging and birth is a bit unclear to me. Um, but if I'm understanding it correctly, I believe it's the case that um, clinging and birth are related in that a specific thought pattern coming out of um, reinforcement results in birth. The difference can also be that when one clings, one makes a choice to cling. So one can actually choose to just feel craving and not obsess. Well, birth is something that you don't choose. So it might be that you begin having thoughts pop up in your head about how you want to smoke and what smoking is like, and you're not choosing to have those thoughts pop up in your head. It might be that engaging in the thoughts and the obsession is the clinging, and that the birth itself is simply um, the rising of these thoughts without conscious control. Um, I know that some of the other models of the 12 Nidanas put birth before even thirst or craving. Um, Kind of makes sense to me in that, the rising of these actions or these thought patterns may happen before one chooses to actually engage in those thought patterns. Um, and as I mentioned, the ordering of the 12 Nidanas is somewhat controversial, but we're just going to stick with it as 11 because of its relationship to the next one. Um, so you can have restraint with birth, but there's still going to be karmic consequences. So if you choose to obsess regarding smoking, but you rein yourself in last minute and you don't smoke a cigarette, that obsession will still lead to future obsession. Um, and it's the second of the three consequences of giving into craving and clinging. So, oh, yeah, woman giving birth. And the last is death. So, death is pretty straightforward. It's the falling away, decay of a process that occurred in birth. All thoughts, even negative ones, do eventually fall away. All states do eventually fall away. Um, Death is a result of or requires birth because one does not have one's emotions fall away without the emotions occurring in the first place. So death is sort of implied by the Buddhist idea of impermanence, is that these affective states that are born eventually fade away. So it's a final consequence of the 789 series, and the chain ends here and can reset again. So picture is of a collection of bodies in the background. I believe that's a vulture and a snake, and then there's a man here carrying a body, probably up a hill, something like that. So the fundamental question here is, why does any of this matter? Why should any of us learn the 12 Nidanas? Why should a Buddhist learn the 12 Nidanas? They're very, very important. So a basic understanding or the basis for understanding the workings of the mind is the 12 Nidanas. So although many people disagree about the ordering of the 12 Nidanas, concepts like the idea that craving leads to action that leads to reinforcement and so on is pretty well established in even, you say, Western psychology. Um, Ideas of karma are supported by the 12 Nidanas. So it builds a basic framework of how indulging in certain actions can lead to those actions leading to cravings in the future. So it gives a sort of structure for a Buddhist to understand the workings of their mind and how they can direct practice as well. So understanding that the chain can be broken at between 8 and 9, between craving, and clinging is important. It's important understanding what you're trying to achieve while meditating. Um, it's important in dispelling ignorance, which is supposed to be one of the worst, or the worst of the three poisons. Um, if you look at the picture down here, um, the very center of the Bhava chakra is the three poisons, and that is intentional to imply the centrality of the concept. We have a cock, a snake, and a boar. So the boar is supposed to be ignorance. I believe the cock is attachment or hatred because they're very angry, and the snake is avoidance. I don't know why the snake is avoidance, but um, as you can see, an understanding of the 12 Nidanas can also help us understand one of the most central teachings in Buddhism, which is the concept of the three poisons, which itself is actually supported by the Buddha. So the Buddha himself did discuss the three poisons: the role of ignorance, the role of attachment, and the role of avoidance in reinforcing behavior. But this framework of the 12 Nidanas helps us create a more complex sort of philosophical or psychological backdrop to understand um, how karma works, how our behaviors can lead to continued suffering. As a result, I think the 12 Nidanas and a solid grasp of them is incredibly important for a practicing Buddhist. Um, yeah, so let's see. Okay, so that is my presentation on the 12 Nidanas. I hope it was enlightening. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Again, this is a very kind of elaborate concept, and I feel that I only really scratched the surface on the 12 Nidanas. If you found this presentation interesting, I definitely encourage you to continue research on your own and get an idea of the working of the 12 links of interdependent or dependent origination. And this has been a concept I've wanted to explore for a long time, and I'm really glad I have a reason to now. So, yep, here's my bibliography. I just want to pay attention or point to my last source, which is this page by a professor, J.G. Lochtenfeld, on the 12 Nidanas. I got my 12 pictures of these guys from that page, as well as an understanding of what the pictures mean. So I just wanted to, thank Professor Lochtenfeld for his webpage. So thank you for watching the presentation.